Hi, I'm Mark Krexler, and welcome to the Climate Web. When we're talking about climate change, no matter what we're really trying to do, pretty much across the board, we're all trying to figure out how to get the right information to the right person at the right time to influence their thinking in one way or another, whether it has to do with mitigation or adaptation or basic understanding or political advocacy. It usually is about trying to influence thinking, not in a bad way, but providing the information that people can really use to improve the way they're making decisions about climate change. Now, what I'm talking about today in this video is specifically the topic of sports and climate change. Now, we haven't done a deep dive into sports and climate change in the Climate Web to date, but I wanted to explore with you for just a couple of minutes how we could do so and why the Climate Web is very well set up to go into exactly that topic. So what I'm going to do is jump into the Climate Web and give you just a little bit of a tour of what the Climate Web is from the specific perspective of thinking about sports and climate change. So just the home screen, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because you can come in here and there are all sorts of help videos, etc., that introduce the Climate Web and all sorts of things at the top that tell you a lot about what we're trying to do and what our perspective is on climate change. So there's tons of information here. I'm going to jump in and illustrate two things. One, our holy grail with the Climate Web is thinking about how do we get actionable knowledge to people. I've spent 28 years in the climate change space, and I see this as the biggest challenge in making progress on climate change. There's infinite information out there. Getting the right information to the right person at the right time is just almost impossible, or it has proven almost impossible to date. So to give you one sense, here we have a number of front doors into the Climate Web. So we're saying if you're coming in as an individual, as a business executive, as a communicator, as a lawyer, we point you to specific parts of the Climate Web, and we have a help video that pops up when you're looking at this over the internet. So what's the most relevant place in the Climate Web for an individual to go to? How can you best use the index, which is a very powerful source in the Climate Web? So we're trying to open up doorways into specific parts of the Climate Web depending on where you're coming in from. And this is obviously pretty similar to the idea of sports and climate change and figuring out where to direct people to find that information that is most likely to be useful to them. Now, where are we directing people? What is the source of the information that we're pulling together when we direct people to it? So I'm just going to jump for a moment into layer 4, which is diving deep. And here we have more than 10,000 documents here. We have 20,000 URLs. We have 1,000 videos. We have about 3,000 websites. What we've been doing now for years is pulling together what we think is some of the most useful information from all over the place that people might find influential in their own thinking. Because each of us think about these issues differently. Each of us need different actionable knowledge when it comes to the climate change issue. That's the clear message of communications research and psychological research, which, by the way, is covered in a lot of depth here in the Climate Web. But let me just jump into our broad subject area deep dives. And you can see here we have adaptation, communications, decision making, which gets into politics and policy. But we also have impacts deep dive, and we have a mitigation deep dive, and a science deep dive, a communications deep dive. And clearly, in terms of sports and climate, there's a lot of information that's relevant to people thinking about this issue coming in from all those different areas. So if I click on the impacts deep dive, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining the deep dives, there are other videos that do that in the Climate Web. I'm just going to go into the sources section, which is reports and books basically. And you can see here physical ecological impacts, impacts by timing, short-term, long-term, impacts by degree, impact modeling, impact interactions, impact attribution. So almost anything having to do with impacts. And if I click on physical ecological impacts, you'll see here that it's abrupt change, biodiversity, ecosystem, extreme events. So you can dig down deeper and deeper, and there's just a massive amount of information. Now, what's really unique about the Climate Web and this software that we're using is that all of this information can be selectively pulled out and organized for specific purposes, to explore specific issues. So for example, that was the broad subject area deep dives. We have sectoral deep dives where you can go in and really dig deeply into how climate change affects each of these different sectors. And right now, these are primarily industry based. We also have topical deep dives in terms of climate and security, cities and climate, carbon pricing, carbon offsets, abrupt change. So here's where we've organized large amounts of information to help people explore more specific topics. And one could clearly do this in various ways for the idea of sports and climate change. Now, one can do this in the Climate Web itself, which is what we're looking at now, which is public access. Anybody can get into it. But it can be a little bit overwhelming for people to have to sort of work their way through different layers of this. One of the advantages of the Climate Web is that each thought that you see here has its own URL. So you can actually point people to exact places, and when it opens up for them, they will be exactly where you want them to be, and the information can be organized the way you want it organized at that point. But another aspect of this that we think is very useful is the idea of spotlights. Spotlights are views into the Climate Web that can be embedded on any web page, and that can be, again, specifically targeted at a specific audience. And I'm just going to show you very quickly how this works. I'm going to pop over into one of our spotlights, and this is What's New. We do a weekly or bi-weekly newsletter, video newsletter of what's new, but this is on our web page, so it's here on the web page. It's embedded. In this case, it's a full size. It could be any size. We have a lot of videos embedded, and if I just go ahead and click. So I'm going to speak to you now from within a spotlight. This spotlight happens to be located at our website, but as you can see, this is embedded on a web page, and it can be embedded on pretty much any web page. And what you see here is exactly what you see in the full Climate Web, but it allows you to really zero in on whatever the information is that it makes sense to display on this particular web page. Now, I can't start clicking around on this spotlight because this video is linked to one of the specific thoughts, and if I start clicking around, I will disappear from it. So coming back to our actual view here, what you can do with these spotlights is you could have a spotlight that focuses on hockey issues or on climate impact issues or on fishing issues. You could have the same spotlight with hyperlinks that call up that information for different groups of people within the sports and climate change issue. The possibilities are almost infinite. So I just wanted to give a quick overview of how the Climate Web is set up to perhaps help explore the climate and sports issue and really help advance this idea of how do we get the right information to the right person at the right time, no matter who they happen to be. And I'd love to talk about this further. Happy to give a web tour, and hope this has been useful.